Welcome back to the Context Coaching Podcast. We are joined today by Coach Chris Minner, who is the inaugural women's basketball coach at Texas A&M San Antonio. So we're going to get that story as long as the background and how he landed there. But Coach, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, good to be here. Good to be here.
So as we discussed, I got a text from Brian Katz, who's a multi-time guest on the show, who was raving about your potential contributions and the path and journey you've been on. Is you got to get this guy on the show. So here you are. So do me a favor, take us through your background. How'd you end up as the inaugural women's coach at Texas A&M San Antonio, and then the steps along the way? How'd you get from Vacaville and Petaluma, Santa Rosa to San Antonio, Texas?
I coached. The reason why I got the Texas A&M San Antonio job is I coached at Our Lady of the Lake for 10 years, 7 as the head coach, 3 as the assistant coach, and started the program. So that gave me some experience. But it was in San Antonio, and we were number 1 in the country, went to Final Four, won a lot of games, 7 championships in a row, and I was head coach. And so when the opportunity to come back to San Antonio happened, it was a no-brainer because it's in the same conference that I was in, same level for now at NAI. That one was easy. I knew the area, and that's why we have 25 players on the team right now, because everybody wants to play, especially a brand new gym and a public school. And so I've been at public and private, and I'm a little concerned about private colleges right now and their future. But no, I started coaching when I was 19. I was the head JV coach for girls at 19 at Santa Rosa High School. So that was an interesting dynamic when you're coaching 17-year-olds and you're 19. And then I was a varsity head coach at 21 at El Molino High School. And that was an interesting experience there. I learned a lot there. I learned a lot. Then I went to get a teaching credential, and I was an assistant at Elsie Allen High School for a year. Got my first teaching job at Vacaville High School, did the JVs for a year, took over a program that had won 3 games in 5 years, became the varsity coach after 1 year, and then 4 years later, we're playing Troy in the Division II state championship game. Then went to Napa Valley College to be their head women's coach for 3 years. They had no team for the 5 years before I got there. Didn't win a game for 5 years. First year he won 10. Next year he won 14. Third year he won 18. But it was part-time. So you're still teaching full-time and driving, and administrations change. When ADs changed, I think it's time to, I've learned you probably need to go if they didn't hire you. Then I went to Vacaville Christian School to be the head boys coach there for 3 years. And then left to go to Laredo, Texas, to Texas A&M International to be assistant women's coach. Went from making $72,000 a year to making $30,000. So when people ask me what they want to do to get into college, I said, "Are you willing to do that?" and move to Laredo. And then that coaching staff started the program at Our Lady of the Lake, where I was there for 3 years. Then I took over Our Lady of the Lake for 7. Went to the University of North Texas to be an assistant at the D1 level for a year during the pandemic. That was an experience as well. And then I had to leave there and went to Midway University in Kentucky, an NEI school, for 3 years. I'd never been to a national tournament and never finished above 500. 2 of the 3 years I was there, we made the national tournament, won a game. The first year we didn't make it because it was COVID, not everybody played, and they decided the conference tournament seedings on ping pong balls. So the first 2 ping pong balls who you play, and the top 2 teams, which we were second, we played in the first round. Otherwise we would have made it. Then my AD left to become a president. I went to Texas A&M, Texarkana in August. And then this job opened, and it was a significant pay raise, better situation, better scholarships in San Antonio, chance to start it from scratch. And so now I'm here.
That, sir, is quite the journey. If I got the math, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. This is your 12th stop.
Yep.
Love that. Okay, so along the way, you've probably learned a ton. Let's dive into a blanket question. What is it like? You're at University of North Texas for 1 year, but before that, you're at some smaller programs for the most part, even at the high school level, right? Other than Santa Rosa and Vacaville, right? Most of the places you've worked have been smaller, off the beaten path, so to speak. Talk about the experience of coaching at places like that. What are the primary concerns? What are the things that you have to figure out in regards to making them competitive with probably better resource programs?
You have to get them to believe, and you also have to spend a lot of time in the community and the school, because you're probably sharing athletes and you're probably sharing facilities and you're probably doing multiple things. Like at Midway, I had to get a CDL to drive a bus. I taught a couple classes because I have two master's degrees as well, and I'm working on a doctorate. You got to do that, but also it's one of those things where I think you got to make them not afraid of anybody they play. Like when I was at Vacaville Christian, the school, population, I think it maybe 300, maybe. We played in the Mesa Verde tournament and we competed. And I think one year, a couple of years, we won at least one game. And so then they start to believe that. And then summer leagues, we would play against big time schools. And so you just have to have confidence in yourself as a coach, but you also have to get them out of this small time mentality and have the attitude, we're going to play the best teams around. So when we get to our conference or league, we've seen better and we're more prepared. It's really a mentality. Like when I got to these small colleges that weren't ranked, we play ranked teams. And that way, with teams that are afraid to do that. Because I believe this, I think coaches schedule weak for two reasons. One, they don't believe in their team or they don't believe in themselves. Because I have to sit there and take it. I mean, I took over Texas Arcana last year. They had no games on the schedule, no players on the roster. I got 15 players in 3 weeks, and they ended up coming in fourth overall. But we started the season off playing 3 top 20 teams on the road. Not because I wanted to, that's the only people that would play us. And we learned. All of a sudden, that team, if we stayed healthy, probably would have came in second, and they had no players on August 3rd. But I also think you need to collaborate with people. If you go in there with an ego, where it's all about your program, you're done at these schools because you just fundraising, like I said, sharing athletes, and you can't make excuses. You got to make it the best where you're at. Like you can't, but you got to give them something special too. Like you got to make it as good as you can with the resources that you have, but not make excuses. If you as a coach are complaining about what you don't have, your players are going to pick up on that and they're going to have a built-in excuse for losing. And I don't lose too much, so we don't have a lot of excuses.
So take us all the way back when you started as a 19-year-old assistant of the other gender. You said that was an interesting experience, and then 21 as a head coach, and then you transitioned to Division One to college a little bit later in your career. But I'd love to hear the takeaways from each of those experiences and how you applied them moving forward at the next steps along the way.
When you come in at 19, you're trying to establish, and you watch college basketball coaches. I felt it was more, I did a lot of things that show people that I could coach. Oh, that guy's a good coach. And I was really concerned about that. And I think I probably did things that weren't good coaching. Like I still feel bad about a team that when I was at El Molino back in 95, 96, they went to a box and won in the second half of our section semifinals. And I wasn't prepared and we lost. And I actually still feel bad about that 30 years later. But not being a teacher and knowing how to pick your battles, I also think it's important to know where you're going. Like one school I went to had treated their coaches badly for years. Like the parents were out of control. They didn't have much success. And it was just a drama fest. And I went in there with the mindset, it's going to be different when I'm here. No, it's not. Now we won. They won 24 games the first year, and they never won 8 before that. But there was still drama, and they're not going to support you. And I actually left in the middle of the year because you're not a teacher. They're not invested in you. And so I had to recover from that. But it's everywhere. I think it's really important that you understand the administration that you're going to, especially in high school. If you don't have a good administration in high school, you're done. And anytime I interview for high school jobs, they'd say, what's your stance on this? What's your stance on that? I'd be like, it doesn't matter what my stance is. What's your stance? What are you going to support? And I think you have to have those honest conversations and also just understand that if some team's been bad for 30 years, there's something more than just bad coaching. Either they don't have a summer program, the players don't care, it's a volleyball school, administration doesn't care, they don't have the resources. And so you have to know that and just understand that, yes, I've gone everywhere and done those things, but it takes a lot out of you. You can't do it everywhere. And you just have to know that it's going to be tough. But most of the journeys I've learned from, politics is everywhere. It's important who you work for, really important who you work for. I learned that in North Texas. And then it's just, you got to read the room, which I think is a skill. You have to understand what battles to fight and what battles not to fight. And I think that just comes with experience. And I think you need to enjoy it more. I think I as a coach, even when we were winning championships, most of the places I've been, I probably needed to stop and smell the roses a little bit which I don't think I did all the time. I learned from everywhere. It's important to be a teacher in high school. I think you have more support. Like in Texas, you can't coach a team unless you're a teacher at any level, which causes other issues. And you might have unqualified people coaching JV and freshmen. But college, I think it's important as an assistant who you work for, and then what your goal is. I want to be a Division I head coach. I don't know if that'll ever happen, but you still got to stay in the game, and you're getting paid to coach basketball. That's a pretty good gig.
No doubt, right? Wouldn't that be the great opportunity for a lot of us? Can we go back to what you said in regards to how you change culture and you believe community school being invested, and at the end of the day, you still need players. There's a developmental piece to this. You figured out how to win, primarily girls basketball. What are some of the hacks that you figured out that you can offer listeners that are more tangible than the kind of overarching buzzwords that we have?
The style that I play is very different than most people. We press the entire game. It's not the Grinnell. I'm not doing that. But we have 5 or 6 different presses. We play up tempo. So immediately it's going to be different. So the other teams have to prepare for that. And I also don't think in girls basketball, people like getting pressed. And so if you have athletes, all that means is you got to play hard. And so when you go into a program that's losing, you have to do something that makes it the winning or losing of the game secondary. So when you're pressing and playing hard, just focus on that. The other thing is you have to have a belief, whether you really believe it 100% or not as the coach, that you can do this. Like when I got to Midway and some of these other places, I started talking about winning championships and going to the national tournament right away. And the looks I got were like, what's this guy talking about? If you don't set that goal, they're not going to meet it. The other thing is you got to make sure as the head coach that you are working as hard as you can to put your players in program position that they can do that. And so I always try to learn, try to emulate the good programs. I try to copy a little bit of stuff, always learning. But you also have to be able to self-assess, like, hey, this isn't working, and put your ego aside and say, we have to do that. But I think when you play really good competition in your non-conference, you can sell that and they'll buy it. But you have to sell that. And you have to be consistent. You can't be like, hey, we're going to play this great team and we might not win. And then in the middle of the game, you tell them how bad they are. You have to make them understand that, hey, these are the things that we did that are well. And then when you get to be pretty good, they have an attitude, because players know if they're playing a real team or not. They know if they're playing a good team. So sometimes you play these weak teams, they get false sense of how good they are, and they know who they're playing. But you also have to be careful that you don't destroy their egos. But I just think you have a lot of confidence as a coach. Most of the places I've gone into, I've changed something, either the bench or their uniforms. The other thing I do is I get rid of all the coaches that were there. I'm not going to lie. If you're part of a losing program, I don't want you around me, because you're not staying. I haven't got rid of players though. Every college I went to, I did not get rid of players. My attitude, because school doesn't like that, private schools, they like attendance. I told them I'm going to take you for who you are with me. And did some of them eventually leave at the end of the year? Yes. But I think you have to do dramatic stuff to show it's going to be different. Back at Christian Boys, when I went over there, it got real intense real fast. But I think you just can't do the same thing. And I think you get buy-in. Once you get them to play hard, that's half the battle, especially in girls. I believe this, and I say this at clinics. I don't care what sport it is, female sport. If you have 2 things that happen, if you have girls that care every day about competition and you don't have drama, you're going to have a winning season. I don't care what sport it is. And so you got to instill that. You just have to. And then you just have to be involved. You got to go to their other stuff. You got to show them that you're there. And it's a way you have to talk about championships and talk about that. Otherwise, what are you afraid of? I loved it when my teams were ranked. I wanted that target because I wanted to see how they reacted to it. And then once you have that target, other teams don't really think they can beat you. And as soon as you jump on them, they go, we're not supposed to win anyway.
So, Coach, if you are getting rid of, I don't have a nicer way to say it, of your staff at every place you're going, how does that land with the community? How do you find replacements, especially at say the high school level. And then how do you take that and apply it to your idea of getting these kids to play hard, have belief, have no drama when you already mentioned you're at a small school, you might only have 10 kids there, there's not a ton to choose from. How do you weave those things together to get this atmosphere?
I think you meet with your administration before you take the job. And you also meet with the coaches. Like sometimes I took over high school programs in California where they weren't teachers. So it's not hard. If they're teachers, it's different. And so what I like to do is I like to talk to the person, take them out to lunch, get their philosophy, and then come back and say, hey, you're going to be in a different role. And most of the time, because it's so dramatic and different, they don't really fit what I want to do anyway. And so what you do is you just make those changes away from the players and you try to make it. And I've always been able to do this. You spin it. A lot of times they're already gone before I get there. But if they want to stick around, then there's going to be a meeting. And like at Vaca Christian, I basically took some of the high school coaches that were involved in the school and said, you're going to be down in the middle school, but I'm also going to dictate everything that happens. And so I think it's important that you give them freedom, but it's all part of a structure. And that's the other thing that you turn around in high school. I think this is key. You need to be in the sixth, seventh grade, fifth grade, building your culture. And I did a great job of that. I would go to the middle schools and they would know our program and they would know our players. And so when you do that from fifth, sixth grade, you start to build like Nevada Union football. That's how they did it back in their heyday. I look at St. Mary's Stockton women's basketball. He recruited, but he went out and got players, but they had a culture. You went to El Camino and played for Bill Baxter. He knew who you were, and he had a million teams. But those are programs that I copied. Like I went to every summer tournament that St. Mary's Stockton with Tom Gonzalez went to, because if they're the best, then we're going to go see what they're doing. And like Bill Baxter and I talk all the time. We play the same style, a little bit different, but that's what we were going to do. Went to Oak Ridge. But to get back to your question, I think there's a way to do it. It's what your administration says, because if it hasn't been successful, they want to make changes too. And every college I've taken over, like I was the assistant at Our Lady Lake, got bumped up. Midway, nobody was left. Here, I'm hiring an assistant in the next couple of weeks. Texarkana didn't have one. So it was easy, but I think you have to, when you're making drastic changes, you can't have people saying, this is how we've always done it. If it wasn't successful, it's about, and then you get that drastic change. If it's successful, then I think you got to be more compromising and stuff like that, because they've obviously done some things that work. But if they're absolutely terrible, you have to change things. I'll change. You just have to show there's going to be change. Otherwise, the players are the same old thing.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that, especially the mention of Bill Baxter, who I worked for 10 years and I'm super close with. I was actually just messaging him yesterday about some stuff. But let's go back to something you said earlier about there's politics everywhere. Who you work for matters. You got to read the room. Let's dive into those a little bit deeper. What do you mean by there's politics everywhere? How have you learned to navigate that? What are some examples of you have to read the room, right? What do you mean by who you work for matters? Dive into a couple of examples so people that are listening can have a greater understanding of what you mean.
For example, especially at the college level, there's so many egos with higher education administration, and their school may have a totally different, again, you're talking small school. I'm not talking NIL, where that brings a whole nother booster club and money people in there. I'm talking small colleges where the NIL is not a big deal. You just don't know the direction of the school. Like private school, I've been at schools where it's scholarships and you don't have a certain amount to get on your roster. I've been at schools where it's an average system and they want you to have 40 on a basketball roster and you have to average it out. And so they're not real concerned about, are you winning championships? They want to know if their enrollment's going, because if their enrollment doesn't go up, there's no school. And so you got to navigate that. Like you can't go in there and demand all this stuff because they're using it for enrollment. The other thing is when administrations change, focus changes. Like I would say at the high school level, especially in California, with not a lot of teachers coaching, it's easy to get rid of coaches. But for example, if you go to a high school where it's a volleyball school, they're dominant in volleyball. The club coach is the high school volleyball coach. They use the gym to practice volleyball in. The vice principal's daughter played volleyball. The principal's daughter played volleyball. Nobody that was over 6 foot played basketball at this school forever. They won a lot of games. You got to read that. You can't start a war with volleyball, but you also don't have to take it. And that's ultimately what cost them that one job. Is they weren't going to miss basketball games for conference to go to club volleyball. I misread the room. I didn't get supported on it. And so those are things that you have to do your homework on. Also, just the history of how do they treat, I look at how they treat the coaches that are before there. If they're bouncing people in the middle of the season, if they're treading them in the media, if they're being unfair to the head coach, I'm not sure I'm applying for that job because they're going to do that to you. There's ways you can do it where they resign or you do it without bashing the person. How long do they give a person to turn the program around? How much do they support them during the year? And again, I've also learned that administrators will throw coaches under the bus just to they don't have to deal with it. And I think that's why a lot of people are afraid to coach high school because, especially in California, when you're not going to be a teacher, it's a little different when they're investing in you as a teacher. I just think there's politics everywhere. And again, even at the college level, if you're at a small college and somebody's a big booster, a big donor, and they have certain, they're going to be listened to. That happens. And so I think, it's a skill, and I've always done it correctly. I haven't always read the room. I haven't always played the political game because I don't like that, but I think it's important. And I said this on a podcast I was on a couple months ago, and I think I made people mad because there's ADs on it. A coach asked me, she says, "Hey, my AD just got fired, and I've only been here a year or two, and I got a new AD. What do you think?" And I said, "You need to start applying." Because it wasn't like because the AD who hired you got fired. They obviously didn't like what he was doing. And I don't care what anybody says. You have more support from the AD that hires you than the AD that comes in and inherits you, unless you're just dominating. Or Lady Lake, I won 7 championships in a row, National Coach of the Year, all that stuff. When they changed ADs, I was like, I'm fine. Nothing's going to happen to me. But that's not everywhere. And so again, as an assistant coach, I think it's important who you work for. Do your homework. Do your homework, especially at the D1 level. But I didn't do that. I was just excited to be D1. I was like a player, D1, yeah. And that was interesting.
I'm not going to force you to get into that here, but let's talk about what you said earlier in regards to you got to know where you're going and what you're after. So we're at stop 12. What does that look like for you? You left one place middle of the year, it sounds like, to go to this place. What does that look like? What was the pull or the draw? Talk just through for people how these decisions shape up, the ones you've made, some maybe you want to do over, ones you were pleased with.
Yeah. When I went to Texas, my AD left at Midway. And things started to happen in a negative way, not to me, but around you. And so when you notice that, it's time to go. So I took the Texas A&M Texarkana job, which I'd been offered 2 years earlier. But again, at that time, I'm not going to a dramatic program. And having coached girls, you get the drama out, you're going to have a successful team. But that's something that you have to focus on every single day as a head coach. And you have to deal with it. Otherwise, you're going to have it. And so when I went to Texarkana, the San Antonio job opened up. And in December, and so it was a $30,000 pay raise. It was a full-time assistant versus a part-time assistant at Texarkana. It was $25,000 more in scholarship. It was back in San Antonio where I had coached for 10 years. They're going to probably go Division II in 3 years. A brand new facility, 8,000 student campus. My wife's from San Antonio, and that's where her family is. So you got to look at it. AD, I worked with at Our Lady Lake, assistant AD. And so I went down and interviewed, and you keep your school in the loop. So when I interviewed, they all understood. Hey, you got to look at this as long as you can finish the year. And this is where, again, politics. So San Antonio's telling me you got to start January 16th. We got to have a coach, men and women's coach here, recruiting. I get it. We got to get our word out there. We're playing this year. I get it. Texarkana, finish the year. I get it. Interview. San Antonio changes their mind and says, you can start whenever you want. I go back to Texarkana, say, I think I want to get the job. They say I can start wherever I want. Okay, let us know. We don't, that's great. That's fantastic. I get offered the job officially. Texarkana says, put your 2 weeks in. You might as well start down there. To be truthful, yes. I had a meeting with my players, and I'm going to tell you this right now. There's a lot of times I've left jobs. This was the hardest thing I ever had to do. I still feel like disloyal I do. They all understood. I didn't want to leave middle of the year, but I get it was actually a benefit for me because I was hired January 16th, and I put probably 12,000 miles on my car recruiting, and that's why we have 25 players, and we're really good. And so I think getting into gym during basketball season, made sense. My assistant coach was a part-timer, but retired coach, took over. I was still on the phone with the players all throughout the year. That AD actually lost his job at Texarkana, so I probably would have left anyway. But in looking back on it, it was really hard. But here's what's amazing. I talked to coaches at every level, ex-coaches, current coaches, players, from my former players, ADs, and said, hey, I think I'm going to turn this San Antonio job. I can't leave my team in the middle of the season. Not one person I spoke to said, yeah, I should do that. They're like, dude, you got to take that job. That's life. That's your life. Like, you got to take that job. I don't care if it's December. And I did. And I'm glad I did now. But it took me 6 weeks for I could watch my team play without feeling a certain type of way. Now, some of those players are going to transfer here. That happens. But yeah, that is in the era of the transfer portal. I guess I transfer portal myself as a coach.
I think one of the things that's unsaid, but you alluded to it, is we can be as student-centered and athlete-centered as anyone on the planet. And at some point, all the stuff we give, all the time that we invest, when do you make a decision that's in the best interest of your family? And how do you roll that out, right? So I still remember when I left El Camino to come down here, which is back home for me on the Monterey Peninsula, right? I still feel bad about, air quote, leaving those guys out to dry. But at the end of the day, I had to take care of my kids. I had to move closer to grandma. I had to be in a place where I could envision myself raising them. And so there's always another group, right? The leaving in the middle of the year thing, you didn't want to do it. Your AD said, hey, go. So that wasn't the plan. What I'm curious about, of all the things you said there, you have 25 players. How do you have 25 players in a program that traditionally at the college level, you have a varsity only team? Talk about how you're going to manage 25 players. Is that the norm at that level? 15 is what I shoot for. You're going well beyond that.
This would have at Midway, I had to have 40 because here's the 40 because everybody has JV teams in the Midwest. Because in the state of Kentucky, there's no junior colleges that play basketball, any athletics, and there's only 2 Division IIs. So all these private schools built their athletic departments on enrollment. So everybody has JV teams. I didn't have to have a JV team here. I like having 18 in women's because of injuries, and I do a lot of 4-on-4, 4-on-4 stuff. So what happened is I didn't have any players. And so I'm recruiting in January, February, and decent players are like, yeah, coach, I'm going to sign and come. Meanwhile, I'm recruiting kids from California, Kentucky, Indiana, who are on plane trips coming. I'm thinking, okay, there's 7 players that I'm flying in. Hope I get 3. I got all 7. And it's one thing if you have a returning team and you know you have 12 players, they only need 5 or 6. You have 0. So if I turn down these decent players, these pretty good players in January, February, who are signing on the line, if I say, no, let me wait, I don't have any players in the bullpen. Yes, what we're going to do is those 7 or 8 freshmen that may not be ready, or sophomores, we're going to play JV schedule, which I actually think is good. 8 or 10 games against JCs in Texas because there's so many of them. And so they get game confidence, they develop their game, and they still feel a part of the program. Now, what will happen is through attrition and through just, I'm not good enough, we'll get it down to 18 to 20. But 18 is a very manageable number, especially with injuries and stuff that we like to do. But we do individuals and we do practice here. But at Midway, on the average system, that's an interesting thing. These coaches think all these schools have full rides. No, most small colleges don't have full rides. So you can't go out and have full ride cover everything. That's not happening. And so you better be creative. And so here, when I got some players not on scholarship coming because the school's so cheap, they got other scholarship. We'll manage it. Midway helped me with the 42. That was crazy. But
how do you keep 18 kids content with playing time, with all the things that usually get in the way? Talk a little bit about your strategies with that, because that's a big number.
It is. We have individuals and we have drills and practice, but I'm very direct with it. And I tell them in individual meetings when they come and talk to me, or team meetings, if we win a game and you complain about playing time, I think you're selfish and I probably won't bring you back. If you really lose a game and you want to complain about playing time instead of come at me with what can I do to get better, then that's negative too. And I try to reiterate, and this is a difference between coaching boys and coaching girls. There's a lot of differences. This is one of them. Guys will make their friend look bad in practice and they ain't gonna think anything about it. Girls are hesitant sometimes to make their teammate look bad in practice. So I always use it this one. That's going to cause us drama because you didn't expose her in practice and show her what she needs to work on, or she's not as good as you. She thinks she's as good as you and isn't playing. So if you go hard in practice and distinguish that you are better than her, at least we have some data that she can go, hey, I'm not, but and again, that comes back with no drama and talking about it. And so we talk about that all the time. And then the other thing, the difference between college and high school is parents don't talk to me. They don't. A parent calls me and it's negative. The player and I are going to have a conversation because but I'm very open about that in recruiting. But I think the JV thing helps a little bit because it keeps them motivated.
Yeah, no, I was just curious in how you navigate that, because if you can get everybody to have a clear role definition, they buy into that, they're rowing the same direction, it's not a tough thing to manage. Sometimes more is better. But if they're not, to the point that you just described, then how are you navigating that potential drama, which is what you need to steer away from?
The other thing, too, if I have 18 on the roster, I've done this even at Our Lady of the Lake. I took 15 girls on the road, and all of a sudden I learned that 14 and 15 are pouting because they don't play in those 2 games. Then what I said was, okay, the school paid for your hotel, they paid for the bus, they paid for dinner, and you complained, you're not going. I'm only going to take 12 and turn going on a trip into a competition. But it all starts in recruiting. And that's the advantage I think college coaches have over high school is I can pick my players. You can't. And so it's, if I don't like their attitude, I think, and after a year, I can tell them, see you. I don't like to do that. But I think if you're honest in recruiting, which a lot of coaches are not, that's why there's so many people in the transfer portal because coaches lie. As part of that, I know. I think if you're honest, you solve a lot of these issues before they get there.
Can you talk a little bit about what it's like to start a program from scratch? Usually I ask this question early on: what did you realize right away you needed to figure out to kind of help our newer and inexperienced coaches? But you're actually starting from scratch. So what is the checklist of, these are high level things, these are things that are important but not urgent? What are the things that you would offer those that are listening as, these are the check boxes you got to make sure you've taken care of?
When you're starting a program from scratch, you got to get, and what I did is I got a lot of local players, and you have to be visible as a new coach. So you got to get out there and sell your program. One of the advantages I have this time is when we started the program in Our Lady of the Lake, no one knew me or the coaches or anything. And so we didn't always get the highest quality recruits because people didn't understand how we were going to play, and you had no credibility. And so you go to a gym, you're still introducing yourself. When I returned to San Antonio, I had people calling me before I even got here saying, I got players for you. So that's an advantage. But I think you got to be visible. That's one of the things I still do. I like going to games and seeing people in person. I'm going to be on Twitter and all this stuff. I think that's a key. The other thing is you got to get players. You got to get uniforms that look cool. The basic things. Get a schedule so you know it's real. This is different here. Like Our Lady of the Lake, a lot of mediocre to below average teams would schedule us because we were a first year program. Here, not so much. They're not playing. Mediocre to below average teams aren't playing my team. It's different, but I think that's the key is you got to drum up excitement. Like it was really cool that I got hired, and 3 hours later I was on every local news station back in San Antonio. That got the word out. That's not everywhere. So you have to get the word out when you're starting a program from scratch. You have to go to practices. You got to be in a gym every night. You have to be able to travel because then you're getting the word out that you have a program, that you have a team. You got to really sell how you're going to play because there's no games, people to pull up on video and watch. The advantage I had here is everyone knows how I play. I have credibility. But if you don't, I think it's important that you just got to go and do that. You really have to work hard those 2 or 3, 4, 5, 6 months to get your vision out, to get your school out there. This is what it's going to look like. Tough part for me, we didn't have a gym. The gym will actually be finished, built from scratch after July 4th. It's really nice. But there wasn't a gym for me to take recruits in. I could just show them pictures and show them the building, like we actually have a building. But I think that's the key. You have to get the word out that you have a team. And so you have to work harder than the other coaches because they already know they have a team. And so I think that's key. You also have to go to everything. Don't go to the best teams in the city or the area, and don't go to the mediocre, because those coaches may have players for you in the future. They may know somebody. But I think that's key is be visible. And then just get the basics the first year because they don't know a budget. Get the uniforms, get the basketballs, get all that kind of stuff. But I think I think it's key. It's also key to sign local kids. So people are talking about our program in the community. They're signing, go to the signings, NAI and go to the signings, go to the signings, publicize it. I did that. That's why I have 25, because there's probably 6 or 7 freshmen that might struggle, but they're local. And so all of a sudden people are like, what? Yeah, okay. And it helped that I was known. But I think that's key. You have to get yourself out there and your program.
So what did you learn, if we take this question and morph it a little bit, leaving California and landing in the Midwest and in Texas? What are the biggest differences that you noticed? What are things that you appreciate about California that you kept? What are some things that you've put to the side that you've picked up in that area that you would bring back if you were ever to come back?
I like having no state tax. There's no state tax in Texas. Gas is only 305 and people are mad about it. It was 289 just the other day.
All right, let's focus on sports.
Yeah, I was just saying. I would say, in just observing it, and I like California, and I know De La Salle's AD pretty well, and I know those schools are good, but man, I tell you what, and I've been in Kentucky, and I have friends that coach in Florida, and I've been in Indiana, which has the best high school basketball in the country. I think the way Texas does their high school athletics is probably the best. There's no transferring. If it is, it's a legit transfer. They have an investigative body that's going to come to your house. The facilities here are unbelievable. They don't have a shot clock in basketball, which I think they need to add that. And you can't coach your kids in the summer. No one in your program can. So the AAU coaches have a little more power than I would like, but your JV coach can't coach them. They're taught about changing that. As far as California goes,
Wait, let's stick with Texas for a minute. So
yeah.
What makes them have the best model? You're talking about they can't coach in the summer, right? Everybody has to be a faculty member or a teacher. How did they get there? I don't know how much research you've done on this, but what allows that to happen? And at the same time, if they're hands off in the summer, why can't other people figure that out?
I think the biggest thing they did, and this is interesting because I know what school you're at, is the private schools and the public schools don't really play each other. They're not even in the same playoffs. They're not even in the same districts. It's a completely total different organization. And so the private schools here are not very good. The public schools dominate. That's number one. Two, you can't just transfer. And I think that's another key. That's not really going to happen. Three, I think everybody being employed by the school, there's good and bad with that. And I also think their emphasis, you have football, and I'm not saying this is right, but you have football coaches because you have athletic period all year round. So you can practice all year round. But you have football coaches in some of these 6A big schools making $135,000, $140,000 that don't teach a class. Their job is to get to the middle school and build a football program. But if you don't win, you're also out of a job and probably out of a teaching job. There's that. In looking at it, there's a lot of the off-campus coach thing, I think is not good. I think when you have more off-campus coaches, because you don't have stability in coaching, because they probably have another job. Everything's after school, so that could affect that. I think there's too many transfers in California. I think the private schools dominate, which makes it unfair. I think the way they do their playoffs is dumb, this open division, and I don't understand that. Like when I coached in California, there was a little bit of game playing between, are you going to declare for Division II or Division I? Here, it's like, you might as well just put the whole WCAL in the open division. I do think that's nice that California people can coach their teams in the summer. But then again, if you're off campus and you have a job, it's the haves and have-nots. But I think that's the facilities are off the hook here. And you got $65 million football stadiums. That's fact. And in every place I've been, I just think but again, should that be the emphasis? Texas was football. And that Friday Night Tykes is not an exaggeration. You go to games, there's 20,000 people there, and it's not even the two best teams around. So it's a little different. Kentucky football wasn't like that. Kentucky basketball is like that. And they also don't have shot clock. And Indiana basketball is legit. And they also don't have shot clock. Yeah, I don't know. It's a different beast, but I don't know.
Clearly, especially as the rules shift from state to state, it's part of the whole how you navigate the landscape of athletics and what the intention is, right? And education-based athletics versus college versus club sports, right? And they all collide, and it's our job to try to figure out what's in the best interest of the student athletes that we serve. Let me ask this, as we're nearing the end of this, what's something you've most recently changed your mind on? Meaning, like, I used to be dug in over here and now I'm over here and here's why.
Oh, there's a lot. There's a lot. But the biggest thing that I've really changed in the last 3 or 4 years since COVID is I do more check-ins with my players. I also remind them it's supposed to be fun more than ever did. And I think people weren't depressed because of COVID. I just noticed it. I think I don't know if it's social media and COVID or a combination of both, but I know my players were more stressed out over non-basketball stuff the last 4 years than I've ever dealt with in my entire career. And I was with this tough coach, I'm your coach, and I got your back, but we're not going to talk about. I've changed that. I've told my players I love them more than I ever have in my life. Yeah, it's you have to check in with your players. You have to let them know that it's more than basketball. And that's really changed. I never would show emotion or share personal stories. I do that all the time now. And then sometimes in the heat of the moment, middle of the season, I'll remind them in practice, hey, this is the best time of my day. I get to coach you guys for 2 hours. And then also, I think sometimes coaches in college forget you recruited these kids, most of them, unless you inherited. There's a reason why. You got to remind them that, even though you get on them and they may not do what you want. I think it's important. The other thing I've changed a lot of, and maybe I don't know if it's good or bad. I won a lot of games. I won a lot of games, a lot, and won national games and Final Four and all this stuff. Okay. Some people don't even care. How you get jobs is not necessarily based on your resume. It might be you need to hire a certain dynamic. It might be they know somebody. It might be you're just not the right fit, or again. And so what I've tried to do is I'm coaching NAIA basketball. We're not on ESPN. I think I need to make it a little, and I've done this the last 4 years. I probably need to make it a little more fun. And I really felt that way at private schools. I was not giving any of them really full rides. So a lot of them are making financial sacrifices. But I think you have to remind yourself as a coach that these players chose you and you chose them. You're in it together. I do that a lot too. I don't blame players for loss, and they know that. And I tell them that. I also admit when I'm wrong in front of them. Hey, I was wrong. Let's watch tape. I'm wrong. But I really have noticed that. And I've really made a point to check in, take them to lunch, see how they're doing, let them know it's okay, and really just, I don't want them worried about stuff. Like, I want them to win and I want them to play well. I don't want them to be stressed out about it. And I don't know why I've noticed that I've had players that have had real mental issues and still played. And I was glad I changed some of the way I dealt with them. And one was an All-American. And she's doing good now, but you just don't know what's going on in people's life. And I just think with social media and the Johnny Topper attitude, everybody's trying to Johnny Top everybody. I think if you don't take time to deal with that and just let them know how much you love them and how much you appreciate them and how much it's just a game. It's just a game. I would stress myself out so much. All these little, I have to have red Gatorade, I have to have orange Tic Tacs, I have to wear a certain tie. And I won. Yeah, it's crazy. And if we didn't win, I was down the dumps. And I won 189-11 in conference at Red River when I was I'm not coaching D1. I'm not a WNBA coach. A lot of people don't care. And so what are you doing? And the course of the thing is, what's going to build your program? People that enjoy their experience there and graduated. If everybody came to my program, it was a bunch of drama. And I inherited Texarkana. They won the conference before. Nobody came back because there was so much drama and bad stuff. No one wanted to recognize they won a championship. They won a championship. Nobody cares. Because in small college athletics and even high school, I think those people need to enjoy their time with you. That's what's going to give you sustained success. Long-term sustained success is going to be how much they invest in the program. Like just the other day, I went back to California for Sly Park, and 9 or 10 of my former players from 20 years ago in that basketball team that went to state surprised me and my assistant at the time, when that wasn't eventually the head coach, at his house. They have kids, they're 38, 39 years old, and they still relish that. And that was tough on them. But I think that's probably changed for me. We're going to win, and I'm going to win. But you know what? I'm going to make sure they're okay and that they know how much I appreciate them. I'll send texts now. I'm way more positive than I used to be. I don't know if I'm getting soft or what, man.
I think what most of us realize the longer we're in the game is what you just spoke to. It's what I've heard on this thing for over 200 episodes. Relationships matter. Like at the end of the day, all those things are fleeting. And what are you doing to build people up, to set them up in life, to help them navigate the challenging situations? And nobody's putting your win-loss record on your tombstone. While that's something to chase, that's great. Don't do it at the expense of people. So I think that's a great way to end. Coach, thanks for sharing that message and taking the time to call in today.
Yeah, good to meet you, man. If you need me to come back, I like your podcast, man. What you're doing is good because you're sharing information and you're making coaches better. And so I really think what you're doing is awesome. And I think more people need to do it. But what you're doing is you've made me a better coach by me watching these podcasts, man. I'm not lying about that.
I appreciate that. Thanks a lot.
All right.